My name is Maya Angela West, and I chose to do my global diversity project on Canada. And the pictures that I have attached here is just their national symbol and their flag. And Canada is our upstairs neighbor, so they border us to the north. Um, so, about the demographics in Canada, we'll start with their population. Canada's population is 37.74 million people, which makes Canada underpopulated. It has a growing population due to immigration, and their median age of their population is 41. So, um, I guess that would mean that their population is aging. The next thing that we're going to discuss is their ethnic makeup. So, Canada's ethnic makeup is primarily people consider themselves to be just Canadian, 32.3% of the population. 18.3% identify themselves as English. 13.9 identify themselves as Scottish. And then 13.6 identify as French. About the same identify as Irish. And 9.6 identify as German. 5.1 identify as Chinese, and there's only 3.5% of the population that is black. I found that to be very interesting. But another interesting thing about Canada is that they're able to select multiple ethnic groups. So imagine how much that can distort this information, because a person can consider themselves to be just Canadian, but they can be Canadian English, Canadian Scottish, Canadian French, Canadian Irish, Canadian German, Canadian Chinese, Canadian Black, or um, Canadian English, Scott, French, Irish, German, Chinese, and Black. So, that's interesting, and it kind of makes you wonder. It makes you kind of think if you are um, just looking at the sheer numbers, is that what the population really looks like? And then Aboriginal people in Canada are growing at twice the national rate. So these are people that are native to Canada before Canada was Canada, before it was settled. So these are the indigenous people. 4% of that population claims Aboriginal identity, and then another 16% belongs to a non Aboriginal visible minority. 22% of the population of Canada are immigrants, and around 60% of new immigrants come from China and India. So, uh, that's a lot. That's a lot. They are now very progressive with their immigration. So, they are not as strict as the U.S. is regarding immigration laws. All right, so now to their language and religion. So the languages and religions in Canada are very diverse, similar to the US. Their national language spoken is English and French. Chinese is also spoken by over 1 million people in Canada. Um, there are also over 70 Aboriginal languages in Canada. So those indigenous people that have been in Canada, they have lots of different languages, lots of different dialects. And then as for religion, 67% of the population identify as Christian. And then, but the part that I found the most interesting is that 24% had no religious association. So, I know that's a growing number as far as religion. A lot of people have disassociated themselves with a title when it comes to that. So I was surprised to see actually such a big number. About of the of the a quarter of the country is not religious at all. Okay, and so that wraps up demographics. And now we're going to go ahead and move on to family composition and values. So with their families, they have a lot of similarities. They have a nuclear model. So that means that the family usually just consists of a mother, a father, and their children. It doesn't necessarily include grandparents, aunts, uncles, or anything like that. Which I could say, as a norm, is about the same in the U.S. They emphasize education, and they're having less children and marrying later. And that just seems to be a trend across the board, across countries. There has been an increase in the number of single parent households. And I guess you would attribute that mostly to the fact that people can get divorced. Divorce wasn't as common, but now that is something that's very common. And then they have same-sex relationships there. And same-sex couples are having kids now. So as far as their values and social views, they value mutual respect, and the class divide in Canada is hard to identify. And that's because, as for Canadians, they're not showboaters. They are not the type of people that are really extravagant, showing off their wealth. They're very conservative when it comes to things of that nature. Okay, so there's a video that I thought was interesting um, about the racial climate in Canada. And then we can go ahead and take a look at that.
DeAndre Campbell, Michael Elligan, Dwayne Christian, just three of many Black Canadians involved in use of force cases involving police in Canada. Each one under the age of 30. Each story a tragedy related to hundreds of years of history before Canada was even a nation.
So I thought that was very interesting. Canada does not believe that they have a problem when it comes to racial inequality and systemic racism. And a lot of that is because, they are so far removed from it that they don't realize that it's an issue. This is also just a video referring to some major events that shows the history of the racism in Canada. It is a longer video of 7 minutes, but if you if you take a look through everything, you will see that in 2001 there was an anti-terrorism act passed, you know, and there was racial profiling at Canadian borders and airports. So even though they are probably more accommodating to um, immigrants than America is, their laws are not as stringent. There was still um, there were still issues with that. And so basically, this video just goes through the long line of issues that they've had. They have those same issues, primarily with Asians, the mistreatment of Asians, the mistreatment of blacks, the mistreatment of Muslims. So they very much do have those same issues that America does. Um, they're just less aware of it overall. And then we're going to talk about the social programs in Canada. So everybody knows about how Canada um, has free health care, a universal health care system. They pay additional taxes to have these things. And um, their government spending is about 40% of their gross domestic product. So they do a lot in the welfare department for their citizens. I thought it was interesting that they have federal assistance for low income, but then every province and territory has their own benefits that are available, so you can get both. Like you can, if you qualify for federal assistance, you could also end up getting assistance and additional assistance through the territory or province that you live in. um but basically they have the same types of services. um they do have issues with poverty as well. And then also, mental illness is still a big stigma in Canada. And so there's not a lot of resources to help people with that, because um, the people are not interested in being outcast because of that. So this is something that I found disturbing, and although I did a lot of research, I couldn't find much else regarding equal rights, unless it was pertaining to, you know, gay marriage or something like that. So for this equal rights, there's one of these that actually, I think it's this Canadian Charter of Rights and Freedoms. Um, Basically, you you wouldn't be able to um, like have a lawsuit against a company or someone who infringed on your rights. So you would I'm sorry, let me rephrase that. You're able to do it against governments, but you can't do anything towards a person. So if there was a single individual who was discriminatory against you, there's no repercussion for that person. And then as far as Canadian stereotypes, I just found this online, and these are all stereotypes that I've heard. And it's kind of cool to kind of debunk some of those things. Um, so, yeah, I use that to just shed a little light on what Canadians are really like. And that is going to be the end of my presentation. I learned a lot about Canada and its similarities to the U.S. Um, and then I'm just hoping that as time goes on, that they are also being more progressive when it comes to equal rights and also mental illness, because those are very important. Um, Thank you for listening to my presentation. Thank you for your patience.